Brilliance Audio presents Hot Schemes by Sherryl Woods, performed by Tavia Gilbert. Miami, Florida, 1994. The deafening music pulsed to a Latin beat at Sundays by the Bay, a favorite weekend watering hole of Miami boaters and the Sinkles crowd. Molly DeWitt had long since given up any attempts to carry on a conversation with Detective Michael O'Hara, whose attention seemed to be focused more on the horizon than on her anyway. His beer sat untouched, warming in the sun. As near as she could tell, with his eyes shaded by his favorite reflective sunglasses, he hadn't even noticed the 5 scantily clad women at the next table. That was how she knew he was far more worried than he was letting on. "Still no sign of your uncle's boat?" she shouted over the music. He glanced at her briefly, shook his head, then turned his attention back to the water. His expression was more somber than she'd ever seen it, even in the midst of some particularly gruesome homicide investigations. Molly understood his concern. It was now afternoon. Uncle Miguel should have been back by 11 o'clock, noon at the latest, from his regular Sunday fishing trip. On days he took out charters, he might stay out longer, but Sundays were personal. On Sundays, he stayed only long enough to catch enough snapper or grouper for the family's dinner, plus extra to share with friends up and down the block in their little Havana neighborhood. The rest of the week, Uncle Miguel worked nights delivering the morning newspaper door to door, then took out his occasional small fishing charters, usually wealthy Latin Americans and their Miami business associates. 1 or 2 days a week, he worked on the boat, fiddling with the engine to assure top performance, polishing the trim, cleaning it from stem to stern. Though the charter boat wasn't new or top of the line, it was his most prized possession, and he cared for it with passionate devotion. A small, olive-complexioned man with a deep tan and dark as midnight eyes, Miguel Garcia had an unmistakable wiry strength, even though he was about to turn 65. Molly had met him several months earlier, at dinner at Tio Pedro's, yet another of Michael's uncles. She had been instantly charmed by his awkward, soft-spoken blending of English and Spanish, and the pride in his voice as he talked of Michael's accomplishments in Miami. Tio Miguel and Tio Pedro and their wives, both sisters of Michael's mother, had preceded Michael to Miami when Fidel Castro succeeded Batista in Cuba. They had left behind homes, family, and once thriving careers in the hope of regaining freedom. It was to them, via one of the famed Pedro Pan airlifts, that Michael's mother had sent him alone at the age of 5. Though Molly had known many other exiles, some successful, some barely making it, none had touched her quite the way Tio Miguel had. When he talked of his native land, there had been such sadness in his eyes, and something more, an anger, perhaps, that his homeland was out of reach to him now. Unlike his brother-in-law Pedro, who owned a flourishing Cuban restaurant, and whose children were now involved in careers of their own, Tio Miguel had never fully adapted to his new land. Like so many other Cuban exiles who had come to Miami in the 1960s, and who had expected to go back at any moment, Tio Miguel had struggled with English. Fortunately, he lived in a community where shopkeepers spoke Spanish, where parish priests and government officials spoke his language. He'd settled for taking menial jobs to support his family, always with the fragile hope that he would return home to a free Cuba someday. As time passed, hope had faded, replaced now by sorrow and the faintest traces of anger and bitterness. Molly glanced at Michael and saw that his attention was still avidly focused on Biscayne Bay and the Atlantic beyond. "You're worried, aren't you?" she said.
"He's never been this late before. Not on Sunday, when he knows Tia Pilar will be waiting, and the family will be gathering after Mass."
"Does he have a radio on the boat?" Michael nodded. "Then he can call the Coast Guard if he's in trouble. I'm sure he's okay. He probably found a hot spot where the fish were really biting and didn't want to come in yet."
"Maybe," he said tersely. He stood up. "I'm going inside to make a call. Keep an eye out for him, will you?"
"Of course."